Okay, thank you for tuning in to Stampscaping 101. This is kind of it's a semi-stamp along, but it's not so much scenic based as more as concept based. And we're utilizing some of these images that are, kind of the more popular images for this exercise. And for the most part, I'm utilizing black ink, okay? So if you're kind of following along with me, you don't have to worry about, um, a wide range of colors or anything like that. I usually keep these stamp-alongs pretty simple anyway. But I'm just using a black dye-based pad, and the imagery that we're using is Lakeside Cove, Pines and Rocks, Pine Row, Rocky Peaks. Did I stamp that cloud? I don't know if I stamped that cloud, and I was thinking about it, but I don't think I did. And the reeds. You don't have to have all of these either, but pick out some kind of imagery that is fairly solid in nature, something like this would be fine too. And what we're going to be going over is kind of an aspect of scenic lighting through the usage of various values within your stamped impressions, okay? Now, what that means is a lot of times we're stamping out a given composition, okay? And from there, by the amount of ink that we're blending into a scene, okay? Sponging, coloring, stipple brush, whatever method you're using to color things with, that is often the thing that's defining a lot of the lighting and where we place that within a scene. Okay, but that being said, and I do this in a lot of my scenes, but I don't know if I've kind of just focused solely on this concept here, but the amount of ink that you use on your impressions can give you a big head start in terms of kind of creating this scenic depth within a given space, and that's also related to the lighting that's represented through the values that you're stamping your scenes with. That, okay, now that that even confused me when I said that. What I mean by that is by just utilizing how much ink you used. Okay, now this is just all using two stamps right here, okay? But hopefully we've created a situation that looks fairly deep, okay? These trees in this midground in here, these ones are the ones in the background. So we have background, midground right here, and foreground. The foreground's trees are the same ones that I used in my midground, but you can see they're just lighter in value than the ones in the foreground, okay? Which means I'm just going in here and blotting this off, and then I do wipe off some ink off the bottom portion of it, but by blotting it off like that, and by getting, going for my second impression of it in there, it stamps out lighter to begin with, therefore it looks farther off in the distance because of that value change, okay? Right here, that mountain up there is inked up in the same black that these two images were stamped out in, but it looks farther back in the distance because I've removed some of the ink off it by just inking it up in black, blotting it off significantly, and then, like I said, I do wipe off some of the bottom of that too, but I've just stamped it in there with a secondary impression off of one inking, so therefore it looks lighter. And then these trees right back in here, are lighter as well. So the farther back you go, the lighter it is, meaning if you've used, just one ink pad black, and I did it in this video just for the sake of kind of really making a point as far as the utilization of ink. Just stamping things lighter as they go farther back in the distance. Okay? This is a tree that's been stamped out, and this is the secondary impression of it. This is the same composition right here as you'll see in this video, but I've just stamped everything out in this scene. The imagery all in black. So you can see the spatial difference between these two. This one, I think you can see the represented distance between these objects. It looks like it has a little bit of a deeper space. I think this is okay, but everything is much more the scene is flatter to me. The spatial distance is decreased by simply having the same values throughout this piece. In this one is, in this case, it's all black. Okay, this one right here, that distant mountain is probably more of a, I don't know, like a 60 to 30% black, and these ones in here are probably a, I don't know, 70% black, and this one right here, my foreground, and I don't know, I would consider this whole area down here to be the foreground. That's all in like 100% black or whatnot. Okay, so anyways, if you choose to stamp along with me on this one, it's kind of more just kind of experiment around a little bit with your utilization of the amount of ink, layering things up. Usually the things in Western perspective, the lower it is on the composition, the darker it is, and the higher it goes, it's lighter, okay? So it goes from dark to light like that, okay? So just kind of play around with layering of imagery, removing some of the ink. Now if you're using really juicy, you know, pads or whatnot, like especially black, you know, when you ink it up, when you're going for those objects that are a little bit, you know, farther behind, you might have to stamp it off quite a bit, you know, before you utilize it in your background, okay? But that's all about, that's what it's all about. It's getting the feel for the media that you're using and how things are going to be affected by things like the surface that you're using. So if you're using a matte paper, you know, matte papers are a little bit more absorbent than glossy cardstock that I'm using right here. You can do this all on matte cardstock too, but you might have to, you know, kind of adjust the amount of ink that you remove off of it, because matte cardstocks are a little bit more absorbent. So even if you do go for a second impression, then you stamp it out, you never know what it's going to, you know, do. But just figure that out based on the media that you're using, as well as you know, the inks that you're using, as well as the surface. So I don't know, it's a fun thing to play around with. And when you are doing these types of exercises, this is an exercise right here that can really kind of push and tweak a lot of, you know, the beginning stampers' concepts, but it's a really easy concept to employ that will, I don't know, kind of escalate your scenic lighting to, you know, the next level or 2 levels up, just by the utilization of ink. And it's an easy thing to do because you're not having to do some kind of subtractive or an additional process. You're just, you know, removing some of the ink before you stamp it in there, and that's an easy thing to do. So some of the easiest kind of processes are some of the most effective ones when it comes to the utilization of your stamps for kind of the effects that you're going after. Okay, so anyways, I hope you enjoyed. If you have any questions, drop me a note in the comments section, and thanks for tuning in. Okay, I haven't done any stamp-alongs in a while, and I thought it was time. But I thought I would do this one more as a kind of a concept than, you know, focusing on a final scene. Although we could do a final piece with this, but it's more about the concept of what we'll be doing with inks. In regards to image lighting, okay, now a lot of times we're defining light and shade through the use of colors that we're toning into a stamped composition. But I'll show you how to get all that started with just the imagery in itself, and how we utilize our inks directly on the stamps to create scenic depth and the illusion of kind of deeper space within a given composition. Now, one of the easiest ways to stamp a scene out is just to stamp everything in black and to treat that more like a, not really like a coloring book, but almost, you know, where you have a set composition and then we're just coloring up, you know, skies, mountains, lakes and grass or whatever, and treating it that way. But let's take a look and see what we can do to kind of tweak the imagery and composition without doing really anything kind of additional. I guess you can say we're doing something additional, but it's more of a matter of subtraction than some sort of, you know, additional I don't know, process, I guess, you know. It's just a tweak on it, I should say. Okay, so let's take a look here. Now, generally, if you go outside and we're out in nature, okay, if we're looking at something that's farther away from us than that same type of object that it's near, okay, so we're talking about something like trees. Generally, the farther away something is, the lighter it is going to seem in value, because when light reflects off something, you know, in the distance, it's coming, you know, that light is being reflected back to our eye, and, you know, when you have kind of dust or moisture and particles in the air or whatnot, the things that are suspended, it might be kind of invisible to the eye, but the way that kind of we're aware that it's there is that imagery gets broken up, you know, that light gets broken up. So a tree that is, you know, whatever, a mile away or whatnot is going to seem lighter in value than that same type of tree that is close to us, unless, you know, there's some kind of unusual kind of atmospheric thing that's happening where there's a ton of fog right near us, but, you know, back in the clearing, you know, there's another tree back there or something like that. But all things being equal, things in distance are going to seem lighter, okay? So how do we do this in our stamped imagery? Okay, now I'm just going to be using black for this exercise, and that's what I would suggest you do. I'm not going to take the time to color all these trees green and my rocks brown, you know, gray and whatnot, and blue in the water or something like that. Let's just keep it fairly simple and just, you know, kind of, you know, we'll just focus on the concept of this whole idea. Okay, so now there's many ways you can do this. I could make this image gray or something like that by stamping it off first and then stamping it, you know, onto the scene right here, so we can control, you know, our various distances with what we'll be doing here in terms of this concept. Okay, so let's say that these trees are, I don't know what they might be, 50 yards away, you know, those distant ones. These ones that are a little bit closer might be 20 yards away, something like that, okay? All right, now if we have something in the distance, let's do this a couple different ways so we can do a little comparison contrast type of exercise here. We won't run all of these images in the same exact way. We'll do several of these, in other words. Okay, so those trees are there, that bank of trees is there. Now I have this pine row, okay? Now let me just do this only in black, and you'll see like a big difference between what we'll do here, okay? So stamp this in black. It looks like one big row of trees, right? In fact, we've lost kind of the nice silhouette of these trees right here, okay? Now let's do it again right over here. Okay. Pretty thickly forested, right? I mean, we could do something like this in the water too. We could, you know, create these reflections down here by turning that upside down. Then you get something like that. All right? But let's push depth in the scene, and I'll show you how you can use these two stamps together just using the same black ink. Okay, so we'll stamp this up again. Get our impression going. Okay, now let's just use that same black ink again here. And instead of just stamping this out, okay, now we could stamp it out in a gray too if you have a gray ink, but you don't have to. You can just take this and give it a good impression, just on, you know, I use copy paper here. Then I'm stamping it out again here. And what we have is a lighter impression back here, okay, in comparison to this. So this one right here is the same value of ink. This one has two values of ink. If value is, you know, relative light and dark. Okay, let me do another impression right here with that one, and I'll stamp it right over the top of this. Okay, so we have kind of more of a grayscale value going on right here. Okay. Let's see, I stamped that side. Let's go for a few impressions, you know, a few little kind of shadows on our water here. Like something like that. See how much lighter it is down there? And then say something like this. Okay, so it inherently has a little bit more depth in here. I could have even stamped that pine row a little bit lighter so it, you know, kind of separates from that tree line a little bit more. But what I'll do, okay, let's do it a third time, and I'll show you kind of a second tweak on this, okay? So this one's just stamping it, just direct. It doesn't look so good, does it? Unless you want a really thickly forested area. This one has a little bit more separation, okay? But here's what I want you to do with your, I don't know if you stamp that one out first, but I should have said don't do this right now. But I do want you to be able to see kind of the differences and what these minor tweaks will be, okay? There's our impression. Okay, now you can follow along with this one if you want to. Okay, so we got that inked up. Remember? Give it a pretty strong impression, okay? Just on some blotter paper. Now what I want you to do from here, and I do this on a lot of my videos, if I have a lot of layering going on, skies, whatever. Now, about 1/2 of the way up this stamp, about 1 inch or so, I want you to remove some of the ink, but I want you to do it from the bottom. Here's the technique right here. Okay, what I'm doing is I'm wiping it off pretty good down here, okay? And then as I'm moving up here, I'm using a little bit less pressure, okay? A lot down here, and then a little bit less and a little bit less, okay? So it is a little bit of a drier inked stamp right now, surface, and then it's really dry on the bottom, a little bit less as I move up, and about halfway up is where I've removed some of that ink, okay? There's not a ton of it on there because I did stamp it off first, but let's take a look at this now. Now look at that. See that kind of transition of value in here? And this silhouette of this tree is a little bit stronger than this one, okay? So we'll take a look at these 3 different images here of the same type of thing going on, and just by altering the surface of that stamp, pine row, okay, from that one, straight, stamped off, and kind of not tapered, but I don't know, transitioned from the bottom like that, okay? That's what I think is the most effective in terms of the layering and creating lighting and depth. All right, let's do that again right here for that other side, okay? Stamp it off, take it and wipe it off. Okay, going on down like that. And you can see that. See, it kind of looks like light and mist, like light is hitting some mist from behind there, so it kind of tapers it off like that. And it gives it that nice atmosphere. That in there. Okay. And let's see if I still have a little bit of ink on here in order to give us some reflections like that. See those reflections down here, how it's kind of tapered off down here? Just like that. So it doesn't kind of obscure some of the things that are going on in these rocks, and you notice I didn't have to do any masking whatsoever. Okay, now let's play around with something right on here. Let's go in with some foreground imagery. Foreground imagery typically is nice and dark. Okay. Now, a lot of times I just wait till the final inking and coloring to stamp in my foreground, but just so we can see what things look like without the coloring. Okay. And plus, when you use like a black and white foundation like this, of course, you can color this any color you want. It could be whatever season you want, especially with kind of an evergreen tree like this. We could have used black pines and rocks in the foreground too. All right, now, what else could be kind of out there in the distance? Whatever we put behind these trees has to be lighter than those trees because it's farther back in the distance, okay? Could be some clouds, like the cloud cumulus stamp in here. You just stamp a really light version of it. We can go for something like this mountain in the back here. If we do that, you know, we have to really control that lighting. Let's just use that same process. Let's really stamp this one out pretty good, okay? I gave it a really strong impression on my blotter paper there. And let's wipe this off on the bottom. Really quite a lot on the bottom portion, okay? I'm doing about 1/4 inch. And then I'm moving this up and I have a little bit less pressure on my finger. It's just kind of touching it. And we'll see how that goes. Sometimes I'm wondering if I remove too much or if it just depends on your pad when you re-inked it. It's kind of getting a feel of it, okay? And I'm just going to stamp this right over those trees because hopefully this mountain is going to be lighter and drier of an inked stamp than those pine trees were, especially for the fact that I'm using the same exact color of ink. Now, if I just did it inherently in a light gray, I can just stamp it out in a light gray and not even have to worry about kind of the, you know, doing an impression first. But that's just to show you that you can do that, okay? You see how that is? See the value of that? But look how light this is right down here. So it does look like these trees are in front of that. But look at the depth that we've created here just with one ink pad, you know, using black. But of course we're stamping it out in values of gray and also transitioning those tones. But look how beautifully that kind of transitions to down here, just as these ones transition in here. I mean, you could do, you know, some sort of a, you know, reflection down here. It would probably be reflected down here more, but I don't know, let's just, for the sake of it, just stamp this one upside down like that. So it does get a little bit of that reflective quality, okay? All right, so let's just play around with this concept right here. Okay, now I stamped out this Lakeside Cove in a full black on that one. Okay, but let's do it differently on this one. Let's take this Lakeside Cove, ink it up, and let's do that same thing. Let's just blot it off first so that we get a lighter impression, okay, on our scene. I'll just do this the same way so we can, again, compare and contrast. Okay, now I'm going to use this one in the foreground, okay? So I'm going to stamp this one a little bit higher up, just so I can use more of these trees from the pines and rocks. Now I don't have anything below this, so I didn't need to really transition it. But, I mean, you could if you wanted to, but you really didn't need to. Okay, so see, that is a much kind of weaker impression than the black of this impression, you know, using the Lakeside Cove. By the way, you can take that Lakeside Cove and just, you know, you can make a huge cove if you wanted to. You can see how things kind of, in theory, would blend together, you know, to make a much larger cove. You can have it, this one lower and this one higher, you know, or something like that. Okay, but this is in gray tones. or a grayscale, it looks like a really fantastic gray, but it's just a blotted off black, you know? Okay, so that's kind of our midground area. It's the foreground now, but if you put something larger and closer to us in the foreground, then this suddenly becomes background. Then if we put something behind that, that becomes midground, okay? So let's do this. Let's take this and just stamp it in. I'm stamping, I don't know, a third of it off the page. Okay. And let's put another one on this side. Maybe I'll stamp it a little bit lower or something. Now this one I'm probably stamping just, I don't know, a little bit less than 1/2. I'm just kind of going for that one tree. I inked up more than I thought I needed. Okay, so we have this. You can see how the stronger... I didn't use enough pressure on there, but you can see how this darker tree right here kind of sits more in the foreground than this background one. But let's go back to our pine row and let's throw something in the background here. Okay, now I have to remember that this one now is a blotted off version of that black. So we have to keep that in mind with this. Okay, so we do it this, you know, a couple different ways. I can stamp and then go, but I think what I'll do is I'll just take this and I'll stamp it more firmly than I did stamp the Lakeside Cove off, okay? So I think I have less ink on here inherently. But, again, since this is running down into that image, let's really blot some of this off. If you're using a really juicy black pad, then you have to really, you know, kind of blot it off pretty good. Do a test print, you know, if you want to. Do a test print over that, you know, before you actually take it into your scene, you know, and then just re-ink it and do the same process. If you need to take off more, take off more. All right, now this is going to be a little bit more delicate, so I think what I will do is I think I will take off quite a bit more ink off the bottom. I mean, it is actually going up pretty close to the top there, because I want this to be really quite light and, I don't know, kind of visually more delicate, you know, in that it's so light to begin with. All right, so you see that right in there? So, foreground, dark, midground, lighter, background, lightest. And let's just do that again. So this is a fast and efficient way of really pushing your depth within, you know, a given scene, and just by stamping less of it, okay? You don't have to do any kind of subtractive process or something like that, although I do a lot of that with pigment inks. I'll run in, you know, some fog or something behind objects, you know, to kind of create a little bit of atmosphere and spatial separation, but you know, at some point in time during that type of process, I figured, well, why don't I just not stamp off too much to be, you know, don't stamp it so dark to begin with, and you won't have to make it look, you know, so dark. You know, it took me a while to kind of figure that out, but, or even think about it. Okay, so I'm moving off quite a bit. I'm going up about 1.5 inches probably. Don't measure anything or something like that. It's not that, you know, critical, but, stamping it off, just overlapping those, you know, front trees, those midground trees. Okay. All right, now look at that one. I didn't take off quite as much ink as I did there, but they're still gray enough. Like that, so we create that nice depth within that scene. And I tell you what, let me see. Let me mask off some of these rocks, and let's go for some of these reflections down below. Like that. Okay, so we have something like that. So we just inherently, there is some spatial separation just through the use of value within this, 3-stamp scene, okay? So you can see it right there. Look at the grayscale in there and that separation that's happening within the space. Now, let me see, like on this one right here, I didn't stamp that foreground. This is the one where I've just stamped everything just straight forward. I mean, I did go for the second impressions down here with the reflections of those trees, but okay. So quite a bit difference, quite a bit of difference right in there. This one I didn't stamp the mountain either. Okay, let's just do the straight in black, so we can really do a lot more of a compare contrast type of thing. Okay, so just stamped out straight. I mean, it looks okay. It looks really busy though, but this is it. Those subtle differences in here. This tree line right here, we can see them, but look how much more distinct they show up here. And then this first impression of the Lakeside Cove, you can really see these these trees in here. They stand out against that, this background trees much more than in here. So just inherently, when you have something like this, or this right here, you're really giving yourself, a pretty big head start in your lighting scheme within your piece. All right, so let's do something here. Now, what I would recommend, I would recommend, I don't know, playing around with that. You can certainly, you certainly don't have to just go with all black, but I was just doing that to make a point, okay? You can do grays for that mountain or something like that. You can have kind of darker trees in your foreground and lighter trees in the background. Just in general, for the most part, not always, but like I said, the farther back you go with an image, now that mountain, sometimes you might not know, like, let me see, is this supposed to be closer or near? Well, if you have some really large imagery, it's it's always going to be the foreground, and if you have like mountains like that, they're typically going to be the things that's farthest back, the farthest back in the distance, unless it's something like sky. Now that's where things might be a little bit different. Let's say I stamped this out, but I wanted a Milky Way galaxy up in the sky, things that are millions of miles away from us or something like that. Okay, now that's where you can go darker. You don't have to go with sky figures that are so light, but just in general, if it's some sort of land-based object or within our atmosphere, like clouds or something like that, I would generally make them a little bit lighter than whatever you had closer to us. All right, okay, but let's just do some really simple toning of this. I'm just going to go with a Memento London Fog here. It's a nice kind of a slippery, thick type of ink. If you have any type of gray, or let's say if you have a really light blue, okay, or a tan or whatever, distress ink, whatever you want to use. Let's see if I can find a clean stylus to I cleaned off my styluses, but I've been really busy stamping out a lot of scenes this week. Okay, I think I have a clean sponge right here. Now you can, if you're working on matte paper, you can take your, pastels or whatever you want to, add to your scene. All right, so just in general, toning in here. Leave some things a little bit lighter, okay? Generally, I put in a little bit of tone around the base of my rocks down here. If you've watched my videos, you know that I like to add kind of a vignette to a scene, but just in general, I really like to oscillate my use of light and dark. Okay, there's a little bit of light down here. See up here, I'm putting my tone in. It's subtle because it's really light in value. Some people, when they first start off in the classes, if they're going with a really light tone, they go like this, and they think, I can't hardly see anything right there. So they start scrubbing, thinking it's going to get darker, but it's not going to get darker because we're not using a dark color to begin with, okay? Kind of this vignette idea, toning in from the sides, working our way in. Now this is not what this kind of stamp, stamp along is about. It's about the, your impressions, and the amount of ink you can use on your impressions in order to kind of define your lighting within a scene. But I'm just adding this first color down here just to make a point, okay? So this is one color, and it's just gray right now. All right, but an area of light right here, and an area of light down here, kind of in the middle. There's a little bit of tone that's been laid down. But look at that great lighting that's happening in here. Doesn't it look, I don't know, kind of, there's an eloquence to it, because we have kind of this atmosphere and suggested material, or matter that's in between the objects. We're saying that, that moisture or dust or whatever's in the air, and light is, I forgot if it was refraction or whatever, where it's breaking up. But you have these little subtle areas in here that are being affected by light, okay? And then again, I've left a little bit of light up here and right here. And I go into that with this one video called Easy Scenic Lighting. Okay, now let me show you, let's do a compare and contrast between this one, and let's take that one that's just all done in straight black, okay? And you'll see, I don't know, we'll see what the difference is. I'd like to see the difference too myself, because I usually just don't do this type of thing. I usually, will alter my imagery out as I did here. But I'll color it the same way. I'll do this kind of overall, kind of toning in the scene. I like to kind of oscillate my lighting on my peaks a little bit. Where I see some shadows on the peaks, I'll run in some gray tones, okay? Going down here in the water, we'll add a little bit of tone around those rocks. This coloring in also tends to mellow things out a little bit, because what we're doing is we're decreasing the contrast between our black stamped imagery and the white of the paper. Now suddenly, instead of the white of the paper, it's a value of gray, a certain percentage of gray. So the contrast isn't quite as extreme, so this in itself kind of brings everything together a little bit. Alright, so here we have this, and here we have this, okay? Now I could go with more color on here. I mean, this one's coming around okay, but this one right here, to me, that mountain just seems a little bit more distant. Those trees right there seem a little bit more distant than these ones right here. Plus these ones, the layers of depth within this space are more articulated than this one right here, okay? These ones that we can just assume, even though that there's the same values that mountain. I mean, just by, knowledge of the imagery, we know that these rocks are much closer than, this rocky peak back here, right? But this one says it, though, in value, okay? These ones are darker right around here. than the image in the background right there. If this one was much lighter, it would look much farther away probably. Okay? I mean, this looks okay to me, and I could still run in some more inks on that, but, you know, there's your lighting right there. Okay, now, the same type of concept. I mean, we're using kind of a suggested, you know, fairly deep space right there, not knowing how far away that mountain is. I mean, is that a 1,000 foot peak right there, or is it a 14,000 foot peak, you know? That's miles and miles away. Well, we don't really know, but, you know, just by the values that we're utilizing in here, you know, we can assume it's pretty far away. Okay, so we have something that's 3 feet from us in these reeds to something, say, I don't know, 3 miles, 3 miles, 4 miles, something like that. I'm trying to think of some of the mountains that, you know, I've climbed or whatnot and how distant they looked. Okay, so that being said, let's play around with a little bit of kind of a shallower space, but let's utilize these same stamps that I used, well, not in that one, but I used in this scene right here, okay? Let's not use this midground in here or background using different stamps. Let's create more depth using just one stamp and the amount of stamp used, amount of ink used, sorry. Okay, so let's go for a full impression. We don't always have to work from, you know, front to back. You know, on this one right here, we went kind of midground, foreground, background. It really doesn't matter. I mean, you might want to stamp something, though, first, you know, so you can kind of work things around it, especially if it's like a cabin or something like that. You can't stamp the background first and then stamp something with an open space, you know, right over the top of it. Okay, so stamp that out like so. Go. And I'll try to stamp that one a little bit higher, just for variation. Okay. All right, we have 2 strong impressions of black here. Okay, I'm just kind of cleaning this off here because I'm not going to use the whole stamp on my next few impressions with that. So I'm not going to be coloring in this portion of it right here. I didn't even use this portion down here, but I definitely don't want these rocks to be out there. Well, I don't know. I guess I could if it was supposed to be like some kind of little flooded forest type of thing. But we won't do that on this one, I don't think. Inked it up from here to here. Solid black, right? Let's blot it off. Pretty good. And then we'll do that wiping off from the bottom. And how far do you take it? I mean, no, you could do all kinds of different things too. You can put more of a streak up here and a streak in here, you know what I mean, and remove quite a bit. Then we stamp it off. It looks like this kind of this fog that's kind of within that space. You know, you see this suspended fog, and that's always kind of interesting to do too. But I don't know. I'm going to try to transition this just in general from pretty light or pretty dry to whatever that stamped off wet is. Okay, and let's just change spots. Things that are usually farther up, higher up in Western perspective is usually representative of something farther away. I think there's different Eastern perspectives in art that are different. I don't know. Historically, I think there was something like, if you stamp something, was it higher or something like that? It meant that it was further back in time, I think it was, or something like that. Okay, so you have these trees right here. They do look farther behind, right? And they are lighter, okay? Do the same type of thing. Alright, let's come over here. It's kind of your trees in the mist type of thing, but look at this impression. It almost went right over the top of this one, but this one looks clearly closer to us, and then we have all the branches back here. Alright, and it looks like we need one more off to the side here. So remember, you can do this, you know, with any type of colors. If you're coloring up your pine trees, green or whatnot, you can do the same type of thing in color, okay? Sometimes one of the things I like to do too is if I know which way my lighting is coming from, if I'm going to have a moon over here, sometimes I'll take this and on the sides of the branches facing that light, they'll be lighter inherently in my impressions on the side of the tree that's facing that light source. I'm not doing it here, but just in, you know, the concept of it. Okay, so anyways, kind of trees in the mist, doesn't it? It already kind of looks like that inherently. It looks like this fog is down here where it kind of transitions off. But here we have kind of a deeper space, kind of situation, composition. Now, that's using the same tree, so we're to assume that these trees right here probably aren't too far away from it. But you can really go quite distant if you use something like this, you know, which is a smaller tree to begin with. I don't know, let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to try to do this one. I'm going to really have to be careful about really taking off quite a bit of ink off this one, okay? So let's go stamp it off a couple times like that. I stamped it pretty firmly too, okay? It doesn't look real dark right here because I'm just stamping it off on the copy paper, so it's not giving me a super dark impression. Let's really wipe it off pretty good on the base here. I don't know, I'm kind of wiping it off pretty good all over, but especially on the bottom portion of it where it's going to transition into my previous impressions right there. The mid-grand impressions. Okay, that looks pretty good. See that right there? See, do they look darker than these ones to you? I'm tempted just to go for another impression of it over here. Now let's give it a try. Does everyone know what huffing is? That's what they used to call it when you kind of huff on a stamp, you know, to get it, you know, get another impression out of it. I wasn't into the huffing though, too much. Okay, that's not too bad. Alright, so see, there's a much lighter version of it right here, but doesn't it look like, you know, those are more distant, and what you're doing there, again, it's supposed to represent kind of light hitting that area, and maybe there's more fog or whatever, or more moisture in the air. I guess it would be fog. It looks like a foggier situation right here. But just doing that by the amount of ink that you're using on your stamps to make the impressions really can give you a very quick head start into your scenic lighting, so it just makes it so much easier and faster for you to define kind of that lighting scheme that's going on. So let's just do this right here. Let's just take some of that gray ink, and now this one right here, if that's to represent fog down here, maybe don't bring in too much ink into that area. And I'll show you just how fast you can kind of really come up with a really strong lighting statement within your scenes, okay? And I'm just using the gray again, okay? Now I like to oscillate my use of light and shade, so I'm kind of bringing in this gray in here, and I'm leaving it light here and light there. So we're going from dark, light, dark. Okay, so you get this kind of varied surface, and it leads to kind of a nice, rich lighting scheme because you have this oscillation happening of light and shade across your page. And I mean, it's not, you know, you have to be real careful about it. Just vary it somewhere, okay? So there it is, right there. There's our kind of a, I mean, I could add more black to it, but I'm just showing you what can be done just with just straight gray. Doesn't it kind of shimmer and look fairly deep? Well, yeah, I'll show you what it looks like. Let's do, I don't know, let's take a, okay, let me see. Instead of just going straight to black, let's play around with this a little bit. Let's take a blue here. This is the Memento Summer Sky. The previous gray was London Fog. Okay, let's see if we can add a little bit of temperature to this with the use of this blue. Or, you know, instead of the neutral, you're introducing hue to it. Maybe bring some of it into that white. Put a lot of it out there in that gray, too. Something like this. It's kind of like tinting a scene. This Memento blue is a little bit dry for me right now. Let me go with let me just take the Marvy Salvia Blue so you can kind of see it on camera a little bit better. I mean, this is a really quick, you know, coloring job I'm doing. Alright, so there we have kind of this bluish tinged scene. Okay. Let's take a little bit of black now. Okay. I'm not going to be using the straight black, but I'm utilizing, kind of in concept, what we were doing in stamping. I'm using, you know, a smaller amount of it, first of all, because it's on a sponge, okay? And when I do this, I'm just applying kind of a light layer. See, I'm kind of starting off the page and working in, like that. Okay? So this is what it looks like in application. Alright, so that kind of oscillation, look at that's happening in terms of the scenic lighting in there. Looks kind of atmospheric inherently. That's the type of thing that I'm always going for with my white pigment ink. I'm always trying to develop kind of this light, this oscillation of light and dark, okay? Things, you know, I want kind of soft and sharp in there, and the softness is kind of developed by adding pigment ink, but you can get this kind of softer look and this oscillation of crisp and soft and light and dark just inherently in your imagery. And look what's, you know, going on out here. It looks very rich, and it's, you know, it was very easy way to do it too, just by not stamping off everything on your image. Okay, so I always talk about that in terms of your image usage. When you're stamping scenes out, you can use a small portion of a given scene for what you want, a given image for what you want. You don't have to stamp out the whole thing. Like, for example, if you want a smaller tree on a meadow, then you just stamp out. I mean, I could use just this one tree like this, okay? But you can also use kind of a, you can also vary your values within that given area of the stamp that you're using. So stamp a tree out large like this, stamp some smaller ones in the background, but also transition them off from dark to light just by the amount of ink that remains on the stamp after, you know, stamping it once. Or you can just go with the lighter color of ink. I could have used black for my foreground, and I could use like the Memento London Fog, and that could be my background trees. That's for kind of a monochromatic look or something like that. If you're going for things like greens or whatnot, utilize your, I don't know, your various values. Utilize all those inks that are in, you know, so many of your ink collections, you know. Mix and match your inks, you know, in terms of brands and whatnot. Alright, I just used a little bit of black on here, but it's not just straight black. It's kind of different degrees of black. It's different degrees of gray by how much is on my tip right here, you know, and how much I apply to given objects. But simple little techniques right here can make a pretty big difference, and they're all easy to use, and I would suggest kind of employing those techniques whenever needed, especially in regards to kind of pushing depth within a given space. Now, I purposely went with just black to really kind of emphasize the this idea of value, so we can compare, you know, one impression to the next. But like I said, you can really utilize different values of hue, you know. Light, mediums, darks for, and this could represent close, farther, farthest away, okay? You know, when you're doing different imagery like that. And that's what I used to have people do in my workshops too. We used to play around with values, so I'd have people pick out some kind of color scheme. This would make a fantastic like winter color scheme or something like that, or I don't know, midnight color scheme or something like that, where you stamp the foregrounds out in this blue. Our midground could be stamped out with this blue, okay? And then our background trees could have been stamped out in this, okay? So we stamp all that out, and it looks really weird on a page. I do have a lesson that's using that type of concept right there. And then you just blend all of these colors into, you know, your scene, first, you know, from light to dark, and that will unify everything together, and it'll make sense in terms of kind of the overall lighting, because we are, when we're stamping these images in colors, they're representing lighting and the relative distance of those objects to us, with the nearest ones being the darkest. Alright, so anyway, I hope that makes sense, and if you've chosen to stamp along with me, it's not really kind of following me in terms of specific designs, but kind of more in terms of kind of the exploration of distance and how the amount of ink you have on a rubber stamp can affect kind of the end result of your kind of scenic lighting statements, if that makes sense. All right. I hope you enjoyed it. If you chose to stamp along with me and to do these little exercises, I hope you learned about, I don't know, different ways perhaps to utilize your inks in just kind of a, I don't know, a easy I don't know, I wouldn't say subtle method. It can be quite extreme, but just a way to kind of further utilize your existing inks for kind of lighting effectiveness, we'll call it. Okay, thanks for watching. Hope you had a good time. And if you have any questions, as always, drop me a note in the comments section.